12 Days by Russian Rule 7. Day 5. Once again, a flurry of owls brought packages to at least half the students. And once again, the barn owl, Harry, was coming to loathe, delivered Malfoy's gift after the rest had left. At least the school was starting to get bored. There were only 2 days left until holiday started, and talk was mostly devoted to that. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were all staying at Hogwarts, as were Malfoy and Goyle. A few others were as well, but it was going to be a very small Hogwarts Christmas. Harry wasn't thrilled about this, as he thought it would make it very obvious who was sending the gifts, but there wasn't anything he could do about it. In any case, he was safe today, and almost nobody paid attention as Malfoy unwrapped his gift. He taunted Pansy, eating a truffle in front of her and refusing to share. But he seemed aware of his diminished audience and put the box into his bag without any further fanfare. They had transfiguration together first thing. The chocolates remained in his bag. There wasn't a trace of cinnamon or any shimmer in his hair. No peppermints were eaten, and he wasn't wearing the top hat. Harry didn't know whether to be relieved or disappointed. Was he bored of the gifts? Had the novelty worn off, and he now saw it as annoying instead of romantic? Merlin forbid, did Harry manage to convince him it was just someone sucking up? That would be ironic. Quit moping, Ron whispered, keeping his eyes on the passage he was supposed to be reading. He can't flaunt chocolate in the middle of class. He's Malfoy, of course he could, Harry whispered back. And I'm not moping. Yes, you are, Hermione said. I've seen you mope enough to recognize the expression. It's unbecoming. I'm not moping, Harry said loudly. 5 points from Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall said. Stick to your text, Mr. Potter. Sorry, Professor, he said, turning back to his book. He wasn't moping! He was confused. There was a difference. Not only confused, but annoyed because he couldn't do anything about his confusion. It wasn't like he could just saunter out to Malfoy and demand to know why he wasn't excited about his gift. Maybe he just didn't like chocolates that much, or he thought they were too much of a cliche, or they crossed the line and were too overly romantic rather than silly little things. That, wasn't going to get better. So what? Should Harry call the whole thing off? He thought Ron would probably let him. He'd given it a go, and it had been fun at first. Fun, of course, meaning terrifying and humiliating. But now it was just uncomfortable and embarrassing. He's probably saving them, Ron whispered. Doesn't want to eat them all at once, you know? Or maybe he wants to flaunt them in front of whoever he thinks is sending them, Hermione suggested quietly. Yeah, Ron whispered back. Smoke them out, you know? Another 10 points from Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall called out. I don't know what is so captivating this particular morning, but I would kindly ask you to save it for outside the classroom. Harry tried to focus. He really did. But it wasn't meant to be, and he flubbed his way through the rest of the lesson. He regained himself for charms and herbology, having a much easier time of it when he didn't have to watch Malfoy be unimpressed. Lunch and dinner were uneventful, and Hermione decided they should have their nightly study session in the library to give Harry a change in scenery. Harry and Ron tried to convince her that they didn't need to study at all since there was only one more day of classes, but Hermione insisted those classes deserved their full prepared attention. So they settled angrily at one of the many, many free tables not taken up by students who were already in the holiday spirit and set to work. Harry was working on a particularly dull Muggle Studies essay when their quiet was interrupted. He groaned quietly and tightened his grip on his quill, refusing to let Malfoy's voice or Pansy's insipid giggling get to him. Harry would never admit it out loud, but he was not a fan of the two of them spending a lot of time alone together, even if Pansy was dating Blaze. At least according to gossip, which wasn't to be trusted. You're going to rip through that parchment, Hermione said quietly. And that ink blot erased an entire paragraph. You know what? Harry asked angrily. I really don't want to hear about it. This essay is about Muggle social networking. Bloody Facebook. It's idiotic. Harry, what exactly is Facebook? Ron asked, flipping through his textbook. It replaced something called a mind place, right? Harry rested his head in his hands. MySpace, Ron. They're I don't know, websites where you get to pretend people are actually interested in your life. It's bollocks. And chaps, tweets, Harry corrected automatically, from Twitter. Same thing, but in 140 characters. Ron frowned. I don't get it. Harry sighed. Yeah, exactly. Malfoy and Pansy took over a table that was really much closer than it needed to be. The smell of cinnamon was back, and Hermione said quietly, but Harry smiled. That was a good sign, right? Maybe one of the professors had called him out on wearing something with a strong smell in class, so he'd had to wait till after. Draco, please, Pansy whined, not bothering to keep her voice down despite being in the library. I'm so stressed, and you know chocolate makes me feel better. You're not stressed, Malfoy said dismissively, and he at least made an effort to keep his voice down, even if his hair gel was causing Hermione to rub her temples. You're just upset that Blaze hasn't gotten you anything. Who will? Pansy pouted. On Christmas, like a normal person. And then you'll have your own bloody truffles, so leave mine alone. Harry could help blushing and had to bite down very hard on his tongue to stop his smile. Maybe things weren't so drastic. Maybe he had been working himself up over nothing. Surely you could spare one, she tried. Wasn't there a marzipan in there? You hate marzipan. I do not, Malfoy huffed. If it's got chocolate on it, I like it. Now shut up, I've got to get this bloody essay done. Ron pushed a piece of parchment over to Harry. Say, you've got to relax and stop moping. Harry quietly managed the paper in case it fell into the wrong hands and returned to his essay, feeling much better. Merlin, take it, Hermione said quietly a few minutes later. That bloody hair gel! The entire library is empty. Why do you have to sit near us? Probably because he knows it bothers you, Ron said. Don't give him the satisfaction. It's not a matter of satisfaction. It's a matter of a migraine, she replied testily. I don't have time to be laid up in bed while I recover, and Madame Pomfrey's potions do nothing once it gets past the just a headache phase. I can't miss the last day of classes, now can I? Actually, if you were going to miss class, that'd be a good day, Harry said, trying to be cheerful and optimistic and not remind her that this was his fault. Nobody's going to be paying attention, and the professors know it. They never try to teach us anything important. Everything is important, she replied. You never know what's going to show up on the news. Then go over and tell him, Ron suggested. Kindly ask if he wouldn't mind moving to another table and see how it goes. Hermione glared at him, then at Harry. This is your fault, she whispered, barely audible. You didn't get anything else sent, did you? No, Harry replied, just as quietly. Don't mention me. Merlin, he's going to be wearing it all break, isn't he? Hermione sighed, again rubbing her temples. No doubt he'll pollute the Great Hall, the library, all the corridors. If it was a one-time thing, I think I could survive, but all of break? At least he likes it, Harry whispered, fighting a smile. And apparently the truffles. Then he frowned, quite serious. But really, stop talking to me. Conversation stopped, and Harry went back to his paper, trying to find a way to explain why things like Facebook and Twitter were advancing Muggle culture. He didn't register the quiet sounds of crinkling or the smell of chocolate until Madame Pince's shrill voice broke the silence. No eating in the library! I'm sorry, Malfoy said, feigning innocence. It's just that these are special, Madame Pince. A dear friend sent them to me, and I thought just one might help me get through my defense against the dark arts essay. We have to write about the trials last summer, and, he said, and trailed off. But you're right, and I apologize. Madame Pince huffed angrily. Just don't do it again! Yes, madame. That's bollocks, Ron muttered. Defense is about counterspells. Using his own dad's trial to get sympathy? Really? Don't bother, Hermione whispered. Harry is still stuck on the dear friend bit. I'm not, Harry replied, focusing very hard on his essay. And please, stop talking about me. Please. It doesn't matter, Hermione said, suddenly closing her book and packing up her things. I can't study in here anymore. I'm going back to the common room. Cat got your nose, Malfoy called over. Hermione glared at him, then glared over at Madame Pince, who was facing the other way. Aquamenti, she whispered, and Malfoy was suddenly doused in water, obliterating all traces of cinnamon. Hermione smirked as he let out a yelp and jumped back, knocking his chair over and flinging water from his hair. Harry couldn't turn away, not when he looked so very, very good. Malfoy, out! Madame Pince shrieked. I didn't, Malfoy stammered, remembering he had a wand and uttering a cleaning spell. Why would I do that to myself? I told you to leave, Mr. Malfoy, she said threateningly. I'll be billing you for that book you ruined. But I didn't! Then he reeled himself back and, eyes like fire, said, Fine! I could hardly think with those three whispering away! He shoved his things in his bag and stalked out, Pansy trailing behind him. Hermione cleared the air and sat back down, smiling to herself. That was satisfying, she said quietly. You don't think he heard what we were saying, do you? Harry asked nervously. Of course not, Hermione said. He wouldn't have passed up the opportunity to call you out. Really, Harry, what do you see in the gates? Ron asked, as if they hadn't been over this 100 times. He's such a... Oh, git! I don't want to talk about it, Harry replied, steadfastly returning to his essay. You clearly don't care or believe me, so there's no point. I mean, I get it if you wanted to shag him, Ron continued. Not that I'm into blokes or anything, but anyone can say he's attractive. It's the personality I can't figure out. Leave it, Ron, Harry said, eyes on his parchment. Just because you returned his wand and he was civil doesn't mean he's not a complete arse the rest of the time, Ron said, completely ignoring Harry. One conversation after 7 years of abuse? Really? We had a decent conversation in defense yesterday, Harry replied, trying and failing not to be pulled into the conversation. But that's not the point. You didn't go to the trials, you didn't hear the things that went on in his house. Already in the Prophet, Ron said. You read what Rita Skeeter published, Harry snapped, setting his quill down angrily. That's not even my point. My point is that you don't know him. Neither do you, Ron said, voice getting a bit loud. You've gone and romanticized the moron because you need to be the hero to rescue him from his dastardly past. Just shut up, Harry yelled. I know what I'm doing. Like you did with Ginny, Ron shot back. Quiet! Madame Pince said sharply. I will have silence in the library! Harry glared at him. You know I broke up with her as soon as I realized I was gay, he whispered. You also know she's not mad at me. There's no reason to bring that up. Harry's right, Hermione said quietly. But Harry, so is Ron. Are you sure you actually like him and you're not just trying to do something noble? Harry wanted to scream. Did you see me trying to rescue him any other year? He hissed. I don't bloody care about his reputation or his parents or any of that. He's different this year. He was different when we met in Diagon Alley over the summer, so I could give him his wand back. It wasn't one silver conversation, Ron. It was coffee and quality Quidditch supplies. But really, do I question your motives for fancying Hermione? And Hermione, when you spent all of 6th year pining after Ron, did I say anything once? Just once? Hermione looked uncomfortable. We're just looking out for you, she said quietly. We don't want you to get hurt. That became inevitable the moment Ron convinced me to do this bloody Christmas thing, Harry said. Now just leave me alone and let me do my essay. They did stop talking, but by then Harry lost all focus. That day in Diagon Alley was one of the only times he had seen what he thought of as the real Malfoy. They had started off as stiff and uncomfortable, then civil, and finally something approaching friendly. They hadn't left as soon as the wand was returned. They had finished their drinks and then gone over to the Quidditch shop to look at the newest snitch model. Together. Civilly. Like friends do. The day 6th year when Harry had walked in on him crying. That was also the real Malfoy. He hadn't wanted to curse him. It was self-defense. Malfoy had started it, and he certainly hadn't meant to cast Sectum Sempra. He had horrified himself, never mind Malfoy. If he had been given the chance, he would have offered to help, or at least gotten him a warm cup of tea. The cursing wasn't the real Malfoy. He was convinced. It had been instinct, like a wounded animal stuck in a corner. All Harry had wanted to do was help. So maybe he did have a bit of a savior complex and wanted to rescue Malfoy. But it wasn't rescue, it was help. And even more than that, it was putting the past behind him and getting to know him and not holding his family's crimes against him. Harry had seen him lower his wand. He had seen the real Malfoy, and he wasn't willing to let it go, not until he knew for sure. If there was a decent person under there, which he was absolutely sure of, he'd find it. It suddenly hit Harry that was the real reason why he had gone along with Ron's plan. If Malfoy had just laughed and thrown the gifts away, or taunted whoever sent them, that'd be that. But he hadn't. He'd gloated, yes, and acted like an Oz, but he'd also seemed genuinely pleased and flattered. It wasn't like he could help who he was attracted to, it just was. And it was Malfoy. Ron, I'm sorry I yelled at you, he whispered. I'm just, all now. Ron whispered back. I'm sorry too. You're not a hero. You're an evil git just like Malfoy, and you deserve each other. Jerk, Harry whispered, but smiled and turned back to his essay for real.